Hello everybody and welcome back to the Overlap Breakdown channel. Today I'm joined by a very special guest in Laurie Whitwell, who is the Manchester United correspondent for The Athletic. And we're here today to talk about everything Derby, previewing Lyon and transfer rumours. First of all, morning. Thank you very much for joining us on the pod. And how are you doing?
Doing good,
okay?
Harrison. Yeah, not too bad.
Yeah.
Refreshed after a thrilling
0-0
encounter at Old Trafford.
Yeah. So might as well jump in. We're not going to spend too much time on the derby, obviously, because there wasn't much to talk about at all. But in terms of the day itself, it was an absolutely gorgeous day. It was a shame the football couldn't really replicate it. But in terms of the mood in the camp and sort of the stadium, was there a bit like, could have made something really special of it? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I certainly think United were the team that looked likeliest to score, even though City had some good chances. But I think United were the ones that were pressing, certainly towards the end as well. The cleaner, crisper attacking moves, I would say. And at the end of it, it did feel a little bit like, we go again. We sort of, lick our wounds, and okay, neither team has really suffered that much, but equally it never caught fire in the way you'd hope.
Yeah.
I thought overall United were the better team though, and so I suppose they can take some comfort from that. Yeah. And I think maybe with the long season that it's been, looking ahead to Lyon and how big that game is, coming away from it unscathed in terms of injuries, I think is probably the biggest bonus for them.
There was a massive conversation after the game that was basically took place on Sky, but it felt like Ruben Amorim said that when his sporting team beat Manchester City, there was like this feeling that they couldn't play that way in terms of like sitting deep and hitting teams on the break. And I think Guardiola said after his press conference, he was like, Amorim can say he doesn't want to play that way, but we are playing that way. And is there a sense that Amorim's not trying to get through to the end of the season, but he's almost been shocked by the level of the squad? Do you know what I mean? And he's been quite openly honest about that, hasn't he?
Yeah, I mean, he's called it the worst.
Yeah, the worst squad.
Team in history. I mean, he then tried to change that a little bit and say he was talking about himself, including himself in that. Right. I think, I'd be intrigued to know how that kind of went down in the dressing room. But then again, people might say, well, this dressing room needs a shock like that, where they've got a manager that will say certain things. I mean, obviously, Erik ten Hag tried in ways as well to jolt the team and improve the culture. It feels like we've got a different person trying the same kind of things, but in a different way. And so, I mean, I think ultimately he wanted to start in the summer, didn't he? He wanted to finish the season at Sporting, and then he would have had a clean break and a fresh look at these players. Coming in now, he was actually asked that question after the derby. Is there a benefit to actually coming in mid-season so you can get to grips with them and you can feel what you have in your team and where you need to strengthen? He sort of had a double answer to it, really, because I think he felt that there's a danger with him where if it continues where it's not looking like it's going to work and the performances aren't quite there and morale dips, people will ultimately doubt his ability to change that. So that's a negative for him coming in. But by the same token, I think there's been a few instances where he can go, okay, that was useful being here. Yeah. The likes of Bruno Fernandes figuring out where his best position is, or at least that he can play multiple positions in this system, really. Yeah. Some of the younger players coming through. I think it's a bit of a double-edged sword for him to come in earlier. And it really, I think, quite a lot might hinge on how the season finishes to get that momentum into pre-season, which he said is a really useful time for him to kind of get to know the players away from the glare of matches every other day, in an environment where you can have a relaxing time on pre-season, or just where there isn't the kind of attention on it so much. So but it's a big few weeks ahead. Yeah,
I think a lot has been made about kind of his management in terms of players' like application to games and how they go about their, not just the footballing life, but their normal life. I feel like it is something that Erik ten Hag was actually quite big on as well. He was quite stern on dropping people when certain stuff happened, and it does feel like he's trying to get, any sort of player power in the dressing room. He's almost trying to make these big decisions, get everyone on side, and it's like, I am the shot caller almost. And how do you initially think that his way of management with the squad has kind of gone? I remember the last derby at the Etihad, we dropped both Rashford and Garnacho, and it was them sort of decisions, but we also won that day. And it was a bit like, okay, he had a bit of credit in the bank to make these big decisions. And has he been, there was often like the veto that was spoken about. Is there a sense that he's got a similar level of power, not just over the team itself, but the club, as similar to what Erik ten Hag had, or has there been like a shift?
I would say it's different because, I mean, Erik ten Hag had it written in his contract.
Yeah.
I don't believe that's the case with Ruben Amorim. Clearly, he has himself said, I will be an influential voice on this. I think he said the final word maybe, which I think is a fair point. You can't be bringing in players that the coach isn't on board with. Now, obviously, there's always sort of, grey areas, nuances with each signing that comes in. There's certainly players that left last summer, such as Scott McTominay, that Erik ten Hag didn't want to leave the club. Whereas the club, I think, felt that they wanted to bring someone like Manuel Ugarte in to, lower the age profile, different kind of player, more suited to that sort of number 6 role. So, there's always going to be instances like that, and I think that'll continue to be the case. But Patrick Dorgu, for example, the kind of big so-called signing for January was certainly somebody that Amorim wanted to bring in, and he's played, every game he's been available for. Even Aiden Heaven, who I was a little bit sceptical of being able to make that leap into the first team. I think he's shown real good promise, and Amorim reflected on that actually before the derby, where he said, and to that point of him being in the building right now, that he has surprised people by being able to sort of take that jump into the first team. So you'll get, he clearly wants a specific profile of players in certain areas, such as centre forward, running in behind, midfield, athletic, the ability to go for long distances in games. And so then the club will obviously come to him with options, and they'll have a discussion around it. But I feel he's obviously got an impetus on it. It's just, I think perhaps Ten Hag, when he signed his contract coming into United, they were in a lower ebb, and he was able to kind of make sure that he had certain provisions in his contract to have that authority. Yeah,
I think one of the biggest things about Ruben Amorim for me is like just how young he is, and not in terms of the wider football, but I mean in terms of Manchester United, in terms of the coaches we've had. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about when he was appointed as Manchester United manager. So even before the discussions were still going on, I'm not sure if you can confirm or deny, but I think Liverpool were very, very close to him. West Ham were another club who were really close to him. And they, especially Liverpool, was reported to turn him down because he was so strict on playing a 3 at the back formation, playing this 3-4-3 that he's playing. Was there not a case of Manchester United have to look at this is the team, what it currently is in Erik ten Hag's system in terms of that, and then this is this fresh approach, this 3-4-3, and the money that was going to need to be spent to make the jump. And Ruben Amorim was to talk about the rush that he's needing, and he's right, because if we spend 200 million, they will be expecting results straight away, whereas he might still be another 250 million. Was that a conversation internally where the club have looked at it and gone, this is going to take a lot of money, but hopefully the final end of the product is really high?
I think they've gone for a guy in Ruben Amorim who they believe can hold the club in a way that they didn't feel Erik ten Hag could, with a certain charisma, with a certain ability to speak on camera to journalists, to the players, and bring them along. And obviously what he'd done at Sporting suggested that he would be able to do, he obviously had to topple Porto and Benfica. It was perhaps in the realm of expectations for him to do that, but equally still I think overachieved. So they've looked at that and gone, okay, can he do something similar with a club that's obviously at a low ebb in Manchester United? Clearly the question is the system, and I think that was actually something that they did discuss at the end of last season. So after they were looking around the FA Cup final to replace Erik ten Hag, was Ruben Amorim someone that they could appoint? He wasn't in the final reckoning. It was Thomas Tuchel, Roberto De Zerbi. They were the ones that made it to the final end, mainly Thomas Tuchel, really. But so what changed then, basically, for them to go with it? I think he then started the season really well. Sporting won every game, didn't they? In the league,
flying Champions League.
League doing well. You had Omar Berrada that I think understood certainly maybe Man City's thinking on the matter, and they obviously were looking at Ruben Amorim as a potential candidate at one point maybe to succeed from Pep Guardiola, and I think ultimately Berrada managed to back it, and Sir Jim Ratcliffe and Dave Brailsford met Ruben Amorim. They were on board with it, they liked what they heard, and so that's why they ended up going down that route. Now obviously, to your point, it's going to take tweaking, it's going to take signings, right? I don't think United have got the money to go and make those kind of transfer windows like they had under Erik ten Hag or even previously to that. So they're going to have to go younger, as they have done with Patrick Dorgu and Aiden Heaven. I think that'll still be continuing to be the case in the summer. Then also that means that the players' wages will be lower, because that's something that Ratcliffe has addressed recently in terms of making sure that the money that you're spending on players is actually on the pitch as well. The issue then is you do have to pay good quality money for good quality players, and ultimately wages correlates with success quite a lot. So that's going to be a fascinating development how that all comes through. But I certainly know there's been conversations around what kind of players fit this system, but also could, if Ruben Amorim doesn't last the course, then could still fit into different systems. So they're kind of buying players that they think are good quality players that can adapt. So Dorgu, for example, he was playing in a back four at Lecce. He also was playing as a winger at times. So you've got that mould there. And the interesting point, we were actually in at the United Academy the other week before the FA Youth Cup semi-final against Aston Villa, and they aren't playing the back three system in the academy, and they didn't do that at Sporting, to be fair. They kept the 4-3-3 at Sporting as well, so it's not like Amorim's got his system and it has to develop the whole club like that. I think they understand that there's a way of getting players to a certain level, and then in the first team you can hopefully make them tactically astute to different positions. I
wanted to jump off one of the points you just made there, jump off the back of it rather. So there's this idea that obviously we've signed Patrick Dorgu and Aidan Heaven and Chido Obi most notably in terms of the youth signings, and we're talking about Manchester United are not going to be able to spend 250 million in the summer, and I think it's quite obvious that that's not going to be the case. And is there a sense of, even from like a Jason Wilcox standpoint, that the younger recruitment for low end value money wages for a potential really high end return, is that something that the club is looking at? I think Leon from South America, the fullback they've identified. Is there a case of Jason Wilcox is looking at that as a potential untapped market for where they can bring players into Manchester United who have got an easier pathway into the first team there in comparison to an Arsenal, and the potential high upside of that? Yeah,
so you obviously, I totally agree. I think that's certainly a strategy that they're going for. I mean, look at Jason Wilcox's career at Man City's academy. signed a lot of good players. I mean, you see the players that left. So you're sort of thinking, well, if City had kept hold of Palmer, Rodgers, Lavia, I think there's a few more, but they could have a really good first team right now with just those players. So clearly the idea is, if you are confident enough in your abilities to spot a player and backing them, then you could get a really good team for not a load of money, certainly in the initial stages. Clearly when they start performing in the first team, hopefully, then you get rewarded with a fresh contract. But I think that's certainly an area that they're looking to attack, really. It's such a tricky one, because you're taking a leap of faith in a way, aren't you? It's hard to get that right consistently to the level where United would then accelerate into the Champions League or title contention. But clearly it's a little bit needs must because of the financial picture.
If you're enjoying the video and want more tactical analysis and podcasts, please press the subscribe button below and hit the bell to enable post notifications. I wanted to ask you about the sort of the announcements of players like Dorgu and Manuel Ugarte, who had in the statements to the fans data points and data references, and I think one of them was attacking sequence involvements for Dorgu, which is incredibly hilarious to an outside person like me, because as we just discussed, he's played on the wing, and that's obviously going to inflate his numbers. And from a fan perspective, I look at that and I think they're trying to say to the fans, we are using data, but even they've got that bit wrong.
It feels a bit rudimentary.
Yeah, and has there been a shift in terms of the sort of the data-led approach at Manchester United? Obviously, it's been a massive thing for years and years, and The Athletic have done numerous pieces on Manchester United's data department. Is there a sense of they're going to try and accelerate this process?
I think certainly, yeah. I mean, you look at what Ratcliffe's saying publicly again. This also, I think, stems from Ratcliffe. He sort of runs this club now, even though he's the minority shareholder. He's the largest individual shareholder, and the Glazers have given him license to, approach it how he sees fit. So I think everything that he says is then transmitted throughout the club. So yeah, he's brought up data a lot. He's been very critical of data at United, and I think there's certainly merit to that, because under the previous regime, they did try and approach data in a more, holistic way and in a manner that would actually develop into real life recruitment that could really benefit them, like Liverpool have done. They've absolutely smashed it, haven't they, with what they've been doing there? So they're trying to sort of replicate that, but it feels like they're a few steps behind. And at United, the issue was you had people that clearly could understand data very well, I think, but was that then being communicated to the right people? Were they understanding what that then meant in terms of what players to sign? Yeah. Because the backgrounds necessarily weren't in football, they were from other industries. Yeah. So they clearly need to do work on that side, and I guess, to your point, they're trying to sort of say that in the statements. But I mean, listen, I think it's fair enough. If you want to flag a stat in a statement, I think that's fair enough. But hopefully they're doing more sort of, and they are doing more deeper analysis behind the scenes.
Yeah, because I seen the Dorgu one like made me chuckle because of the reason why I just said, and I was a bit like, I really appreciate like what they're trying to do, but at the same time I was like, that is like contextually wrong.
You're almost exposing yourself.
To even more flack.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you. You just mentioned there about the redundancies and sort of the cost cutting measures, and we've often spoke on here about how the sporting director and the leadership has gone like in a completely different path, but it does feel like Sir Jim Ratcliffe has got like a long-standing leadership over the entire club and the entire operations of the club. And I wanted to ask you, from an internal perspective, is there a case that he is now just the shot caller, and it doesn't feel like, obviously the Glazers will have the input, but it feels like almost now every decision that's being made, it's being reported as Ratcliffe makes this decision.
Yeah, it's him.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating. A lot of people that I speak to around it that know the club, that know how finance works and how stocks and shares work, are very intrigued as to this relationship, because, I mean, listen, Ratcliffe wanted to buy all the Glazers shares originally. That was what his deal was. But they couldn't do that because then the people with the Class A shares, which are on the New York Stock Exchange, wouldn't get any value for their shares. It'd be a totally, it just wouldn't be legal, really. So they pushed back on that, and ultimately his deal then was, okay, I'll buy 25% of the Glazer shares and also 25% of the Class A shares that are traded on the New York Stock Exchange. So he then sort of got around it like that, but ultimately that is his desire to control the club. So why did the Glazers allow him to buy all this money, buy all these shares for all this money, and then have control of the club,
so much control,
and step back?
You
could say that he is kind of like a human shield for them at the moment. They were getting all the stick, and to be fair, the fans protested again at Old Trafford on Sunday, and the Glazers were the direction of their ire there. So I suppose he's not totally shielding them, but I think the focus is more on Ratcliffe and his decisions that he's making than the Glazers. So they're, if he ultimately makes United a success, then they'll benefit from that because they've still got the shares and they'll go up in value, supposedly. He could obviously then buy them. But there is this drag-along agreement that comes into effect, I think, in a year or so, where basically the Glazers can sell their shares of the club that they still have, and also Ratcliffe shares if he doesn't match what the offer is from this new bidder. So that's a kind of intriguing dynamic. He can obviously match the shares as well, but so how do they work together? What's the relationship? There's these exco meetings that they have kind of every month that Joel and Avram usually attend, sometimes in London, sometimes in Monaco. I think one was in Barcelona during the America's Cup as well, the sailing. So they are sort of seeing each other, to my understanding, but I'm fascinated to know to what degree they're sort of happy with what's going on, or they give validation to it. I mean, the stadium stuff was all Ratcliffe. There was no Glazer quotes anywhere, and that's such a huge project. I mean, that's a big question, how you're going to fund that. So, I think it's a fascinating dynamic, and I think we'll hear more about it as the sort of weeks and months go on.
Yeah, I mean, obviously on the overlap itself, we had Gary Neville's interview with Sir Jim Ratcliffe, and I actually thought he asked him a lot of hard-cutting questions that was a bit surprising to me. And I was when I was watching it, and obviously the stadium stuff come out around that time, it did feel like there's so much of this. He's the man. Like if people refer to Manchester United's ownership now, even in articles and names, and it's always Ratcliffe. And I did want to come onto the stadium, and I wanted to ask you stuff about what is the plan for that? Because obviously we've been talking about Manchester United not being able to spend money in the summer, how they've done in past summers. We're talking about them paying off players who they've bought in previous windows coming into this window, and the backdating payments and the inflated wage bill, as everyone knows. How have they thought about this in terms of the naming rights as potential, funds influx into the club? Obviously, it wants to be the Wembley of the North, so they'll get outside investment from that. How do they expect this stadium? How are they expecting that to coincide with the finances of the club right now?
Yeah, so obviously, it was kind of jarring for people that sort of Ratcliffe was talking about United's cash issues and kind of going quite strong on some of the stuff that he said, which I don't think is quite accurate. But he was making a point, I suppose you could say, artistically. Although the United being a PLC and traded on the stock exchange is an interesting sort of aspect to consider in all that as well. But they're kind of two separate things, aren't they? Where you can certainly get finance for a stadium because you look at the scale of it and the idea that it would generate so much revenue, and people would, I think, want to be a part of that. Yeah. Certainly when I was down there at Foster and Partners, the architects that have unveiled these designs, speaking to Omar Barada and Colette Roach, and Barada, the chief exec, was very confident that they would get financing for this without going into details. So I think you're right. Sponsorship is certainly one, and it wouldn't necessarily just be the title sponsor of the stadium. Yeah. It could be the fan zone or the mega store or different aspects to it, like you have with the training ground or the shirt sleeve. Yeah. So there's that part. They could try and take on more debt, from a bank. The issue there is that they've already got a lot of debt, obviously, and that is coming up for renewal. I think 2027, when they've got to either pay it off, which they won't do, or they'll renegotiate for fresh terms. But are the terms going to be as sort of, I don't know, generous? I'm not really generous at the moment, but are they going to be as financially viable as they are right now? That's another consideration. And then could Ratcliffe, INEOS put the money in themselves? But that might need then them getting equity in the club. Would the Glazers allow that? Because that would dilute their shareholding. So it's this, fascinating entanglement of all different manner of things. Plus then you throw in the government support that they clearly want. I mean, they announced it as, we are backing the government's sort of drive for new building in this country, which is an interesting sort of framing of it. But that's obviously for the kind of surrounding area with the houses, with the freight terminal, with, the different aspects around that kind of Trafford Park area. So, a lot of questions, but as you say earlier, Harrison, like, it's Ratcliffe's show at the moment.
It's just, honestly, it was kind of brain numbing at the time, because I thought it was like I'd missed an announcement saying they'd bought the club, right. And I was just okay. Do you know what I mean? Like, they have that much power that it feels like, and
it was so fascinating. I mean, when it all got announced, because it was originally announced as a strategic review and but the club was up for sale. You had these different bidding partners. There was a lot of stuff being spoken about, and ultimately it came down to Ratcliffe and Sheikh Jassim, Qatar, and that's surprising, really, that you can only have two people that are going for this massive club that's got huge history and prestige. But it's clearly he's got the keys right now.
I just wanted to ask you, obviously, about the kind of the cost-cutting measures, and if there's something in place where it almost feels like too many cooks in the kitchen. I know that term's been used a lot at Manchester United, but we just spoke about the recruitment process, and we've interviewed numerous recruitment people on this podcast, and they always say that their recruitment departments, from Liverpool to Frankfurt to City, like, they're so streamlined, so they've always got like a chain of command where they all go through it, and the scouts know what they're doing. They've got this person as like their line manager, if you will, then there's a senior, and the manager comes into play. It does feel like, when I speak to people now, that it's almost like, even people who have told me about Manchester United from an onlooking perspective, it's like there's way too many people involved in that situation. And that kind of brings me on to talk about the issues with Dan Ashworth and sort of Christopher Vavell's newer role, or not newer role, but extended role. And how did they get that so wrong? What was there anything from your view that was like catastrophically wrong? Because I was looking at it and I was like, they brought in a director of football to obviously lead this new project, and there were issues that they didn't agree with him on, but then to pay him out, and after paying him in, it just felt like an absolute mess, didn't it? Was there anything that was like he led first on and they were just like, right, that was a huge red flag? Or do you think they're kind of covering their backsides a little bit?
I think there's probably a few things going on. It is very surprising. I think it's embarrassing that you've waited all this time, you've paid all this money, you've told people. So Ratcliffe, is one of the best sporting directors in the world, 10 out of 10, that kind of stuff. Who's he getting that kind of
information from?
So that's a question. And then also, I think there was a personality clash, with Ratcliffe and Ashworth. I certainly think Ratcliffe is a very, bullish individual who says what he thinks, and I think certainly that appeals to a lot of people. As you say, the interview with Gary was excellent, I thought, and he did other interviews where no question was off limits. So I think you've got to kind of admire that from an owner, because the Glazers haven't spoken for 20 years since they've taken over the club. So, but at the same time, that means there's going to be clashes, you think, because he wants, success tomorrow, and other people might say, well, it might take a bit of time, actually. I think Dan Ashworth was certainly somebody that was a builder of things, wasn't a transfer guru that maybe people expected him
outside,
to be.
Yeah. And
I think also Dan Ashworth, regarding the head coach appointment sort of succeeding from Erik ten Hag, I think his sort of proposals were more, Premier League based, were more sort of about keeping the kind of current status quo, just to kind of get a sense of things, and trying to avoid maybe this idea that they had to then rip up the whole squad and start all over again. And I think he provided a list rather than this is definitely who we should go for.
Right.
I think Barada was clear about going for Amorim, and I think Ratcliffe was sort of wondering, well, aren't you the sporting director? Shouldn't you know who we should go for immediately?
Yeah.
And so, I think ultimately he decided to, change it there and then if it wasn't working, act quickly. I certainly also think, to your point, in terms of the Cooks element, I was getting that information in the summer that there was a lot of people that were sort of governing transfers, shall we say. Clearly Ashworth was the guy at Carrington, and I think was pretty popular actually with people there, but was he definitely the one to go to on a new signing? You also had Jason Wilcox, technical director, as you say, Christopher Favell. He was originally an interim director of recruitment, so why was he only an interim at that point? And then obviously Ashworth has gone and he's been made permanent. Jason Wilcox's role has increased since Ashworth's gone, and Colette Roach even, so she was chief operating officer. She's now kind of looking at football operations for the first time in her career, and that is something that kind of Ashworth was across in terms of like logistics and travel and that kind of thing. So it's a kind of, again, fascinating dynamic how it all works out. And I think the regime previously to INEOS making the investment, certainly the recruitment, they had a lot of scouts over the world, something like 150, including part-time. A lot of reports coming in. They knew all the players, but there was, in my opinion, not the dynamism to go and get these players at the right moment and the confidence to do so. Often it was then ended up being perhaps maybe too manager-led, or just not the kind of impetus to go and do these kind of difficult transfers.
Decisiveness.
Yeah. And clearly they're trying to change that. I guess let's see, the proof is in the pudding on that one.
Yeah, because I would think the one thing that was big for me was that Sir Jim Ratcliffe has spoken about, getting all these ducks in a row and getting the right people into the right roles. But as you've just said there, we've got people at the top of kind of footballing operations who are covering it for the first time, and it almost feels like a really big. I think the summer decision to keep Erik ten Hag was a big one in terms of, they went off fan voice a little bit in terms of what they felt after the FA Cup final, but it felt like they brought Dan Ashworth in, and then it was a huge red flag, the fact that they got rid of him. But now also there's a situation where they've had to bring this interim and make his role a bit permanent, and obviously bring over some people who maybe not worked on it. And it does feel like this summer leading up to it, how does the top of the recruitment, ranks look in terms of, the seniority? Is it almost is it a well-oiled machine yet? Is it a lot better than 6 months ago, or does it feel?
It's tough to say, really, isn't it? I mean, I certainly think something had to change with the recruitment system as it was. It was just too much clog. I spoke to several people that were involved and had experience of it from the outside as well, and getting signings done was an issue. And I think ultimately perhaps that was a Glazer problem as well, where getting back to people was a slower process than it should have been, deliberating. And they were across the details. They wanted to know, Joel wanted to know the cost of different elements of signing. So, I think that's a bit of a red herring to suggest that they weren't involved. But nonetheless, I think it broke down. And so the new team, I think, I hear good things about Christopher Favell. Omar Barada's clearly shown himself capable, for example, with the Erling Haaland deal at Man City. It's unusual that a chief exec perhaps would be that involved in the football side, but obviously that is something that I think INEOS have wanted to have, someone with a more football-savvy brain. Jason Wilcox, as we said earlier, with the Man City Academy, clearly that's where he's, done a lot of good work. Can you replicate that at first team level at a club like United? But if they're going for kind of a younger profile, then maybe they've got this, a few more years of allowances for it to smooth out. But that being said, United still need to be challenging in the current, and so meshing young with experienced players, I think, is a real vital aspect to their jobs.
Yeah, because it feels like at the moment, from my perspective, I don't understand who's maybe being the shot caller, especially in the January transfer window, like with the Dorgu signing. I believe that the Dorgu signing was probably like a bit of heavy data, a bit of heavy like scouting and, you know, young lad kind of.
And he's potentially available as well.
Yeah, good fee. I think the good wage was reported as well, and I think that was kind of a collective decision. And I think they said that this is almost like how the signings are going to look moving forward.
That makes sense, right?
And it makes sense in theory.
It's just that sometimes you need someone to just go, right, no, we're going for this.
Yeah, and it just felt like a bit of decisiveness maybe, and I almost feel like they wanted to give Amorim something in January to be like, we've not just let you know, coast through the January with this new system and not really helping you, but it almost felt as well like that could have been a deal that you could have done in the summer.
Yeah.
And it felt like they wanted to prove themselves. And is there a feeling that inside the camp they almost want to show that they can get something right after such a major kind of bust up in the summer?
Yeah.
Is there a feeling that they want to kind of recoup them losses to the fans?
I think it'd be naive to think they weren't alert to how the Dan Ashworth thing looks.
Yeah.
I think you're right. I think Dorgu could have been done in the summer, because I think Lecce had kind of made noises that they weren't going to leave in January. Obviously, that was a negotiation tactic in the end, but I think they would have been totally happy to keep him. Same with Aidan Heaven. I mean, his contract was up in the summer. I think maybe the fact that he was looking around himself already maybe pushed United a little bit. I think he was spotted at a Frankfurt game, for example.
Yeah.
So I think they realised they had to move then to go and actually get him and pay a bit of money ahead of getting him at the end of his contract. So, yeah, they were two that they, I think, looked at. Young fitted his system, and, you know, because they did say no, didn't they, ultimately, to signing a centre forward or an attacker. You know, Matthias Tell was one where I think they were quoted like 10 million or something for a loan fee for the second half of the season, which is just crazy. And obviously he's not necessarily playing all that often for Tottenham now. So, and they've got a loan option, haven't they, in their deal, which wasn't offered to United. So I think they thought, that's too rich, we're going to make a call here. And I think they need to do stuff like that, because otherwise they'll continue, United as a club, to get, you know, taken advantage of by agents and other clubs if they don't draw the line and say, well, we're not going to do a deal actually at all.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you just a little bit, just to go back, and then I'll move on into the summer. But I was just thinking then, with the Dan Ashworth, with Dan Ashworth being in place in the summer, and obviously the transfer and the final manager shortlist that was kind of coming out, who would have been pushing the names like Thomas Tuchel if Dan Ashworth was so maybe domestic focused?
Yeah, I think you basically had a situation where United made it obvious, the people that were at the club at the time, and it's a delicate conversation to say who was actually doing what at the time. But I think people were aware that United were looking around, right?
Yeah.
It was no secret. There was a lot of people that were being spoken to. So I think you've got agents that are putting their candidates in for that kind of, you know, conversation. But clearly Thomas Tuchel was out of work, so they might have already thought proactively themselves, he's somebody that's won the Champions League with Chelsea, done it in the Premier League, has that charisma that we're talking about, certainly ability to speak on camera and to the players. And so I think that's where that came from ultimately. So Dan Ashworth at that point, you know, wasn't allowed to be involved with United business because he was on gardening leave. So I do generally think that he wasn't really, you know, okay, there might have been some conversations behind the scenes, but I don't think there was ever him driving anything like that, to be honest. Obviously, there was other people there that were at the club, but ultimately they got to a financial part with Tuchel.
Yeah.
You know, for what reason? It depends who you speak to.
Yeah.
Why it didn't happen? Did he really want a longer break? Was he not impressed with the financial offer being made? Did he look at the situation at United and think, actually, not for me?
It's too big.
Did he look at the Erik ten Hag winning the FA Cup and think it'd actually be quite difficult to come in as manager after that, because the fans were kind of on board with Erik ten Hag staying at that point, I think, majority, yeah. So a combination of factors, but ultimately he's England manager now, so
yeah, no,
how times change.
I know, it felt like a ship had sailed almost, because it felt like you know, you never really get to a point in the summer where there's like Premier League capable winning managers available in the summer, and when he was available, it almost felt like
Would you have gone for Tuchel?
Yeah, I really would have. I said it like as soon as the season ended, and I was very like, when Erik ten Hag won the trophy, obviously you enjoy like the couple hours, and I did understand some of the fan noise, but then when I slept and I woke up, I was like, I still feel like this would almost be perfect for him now to leave, and I know it.
I think he was expecting it.
moving on into kind of foreseeing what's going to happen in the summer, and obviously we've spoken about maybe financial restrictions for Manchester United, and I want to talk to you a little bit about the loan deals that are currently out in place for Jadon Sancho and Marcus Rashford and Antony. And obviously Jadon Sancho's got a obligation to buy, which somehow isn't an obligation, but and then Marcus Rashford's got an option and Antony's not got a potential buy option in the summer. So I wanted to just say, if the deals for Jadon Sancho and Marcus Rashford hypothetically went through, would there be a case of in the summer they've got a lot more to play with money-wise, or is the money pocketed in January and it doesn't balance the books, you know what I mean?
No, yeah, I think it does then come into play.
Yeah.
I think that's they are absolutely looking at that and going, if we can sell these players that are on the periphery of our squad, they're not even in the squad, are they?
No.
Rashford was out for a long time.
Yeah.
Sancho has been exiled for a long time. Antony just has not ever really done it for United. So if they can get any kind of value from selling them, then that absolutely is a big bonus. And yeah, it wasn't in January that these kind of, that kind of money would come in.
Yeah.
The Rashford one's really fascinating, isn't it? Because he's doing well, I think, at Villa.
Yeah.
I think he's doing it as well as we probably expected, because we all know what quality he is. It's just the application and the kind of the drive to do it. And so he's got that carrot with Villa, particularly in the Champions League. That's the kind of night that surely he would thrive in. So, and that would then maybe, if he does really well at Villa, bring other clubs to the table, the kind of clubs that he was ideally, I think, looking for in January. 40 million, I think people might look at that and go, is that less than what you'd expect for a player 27, with that kind of pedigree that he's got? But I think you have to look at the picture of what he was, he was out of the team totally at United. Amorim had made his call, and the club had made their call, to be honest, as well. So it's just, obviously, he's on big wages. Can a club afford that? There's going to be a conversation around the negotiation of that at some point. Because Villa were paying 75%, but Rashford would be entitled to 100%. So if Villa can only afford 75%, then there needs to be a conversation on that 25 if he then leaves the club. Same with Sancho. I mean, it's intriguing dilemma, that one.
I'm not sure how much you know about, obviously, like the structuring of contracts, but is that something that's in every contract?
I would imagine. I mean, to be honest, because the issue is, right, if he. So they've done this obligation with Chelsea. I don't know, I could be wrong, but has he agreed personal terms with Chelsea? So if he comes to the end of the season and can't agree personal terms, because again he's on a good contract to United, but Chelsea still have to pay him, how does that work? They can't agree to that. So I think basically if they can't agree personal terms, perhaps, or whatever, then it's a £5 million fee. Then he's back at United, and United still obviously have the opportunity to sell him if they so wish. And so, it's an unexpected development. I think people thought once he'd done this deal with Chelsea, that was it.
Cut ties.
But I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, maybe just because it's such a unique situation with him that this has come out, maybe there is that provision in all these contracts.
Because I actually wanted to ask you as well about, there was these conversations that were going on in the background that, obviously, Aston Villa, I don't think, if they don't get Champions League football, I think they're in a really difficult financial position in terms of the summer coming up. And obviously if his option to go to Villa was paid in the summer for 40 million, how much would that hurt them financially, and whether or not they can actually afford or want to do that deal. And I wanted to say, if there was ever a potential for him to perform well there, have the option to buy, but them not buy him, and then him go, like you said, to like a European club like a Barcelona, I don't know, PSG, whatever. And I wanted to just ask you, was there a sense that when he was leaving that, were them clubs around, or was it simply just an Aston Villa was the one?
Aston Villa ultimately were the one that could afford him. Certainly there was genuine talks, AC Milan, Barcelona, Borussia Dortmund, but ultimately I just don't think that they could, the wages is the issue. So Villa have made a decision to go for it with this special kind of unique situation they're in with the Champions League, quarterfinals now ahead. So it's a calculated gamble for them, I suppose. And obviously they'd sold John Duran, hadn't they? So they kind of had a bit more flexibility, I suppose. But those clubs were definitely there. It's just obviously they've got a decision to make, haven't they, over whether he's the right kind of player for them at this moment. But he's obviously shown that he's got that high ceiling. But I'd be really interested to see what clubs do come to the table in a genuine way in the summer.
Yeah, because I think for me it was almost like, I don't think anyone was ever saying that he was going to have a bad time there. I don't think anyone was counting him out or whatever, but obviously, as we've spoken about, it's the application to Manchester United and application to, obviously, football. And I wanted to just say, like, are they even thinking about a genuine possibility where he does come back? And then how do we go again? Because obviously Amorim's made that big call.
Yeah.
The relationship's probably a bit torn. How do Manchester United go about that if he doesn't get any potential bidders in the summer, and if he does return?
Tricky, isn't it? Because, I mean, they've kind of made it obvious then the leverage in negotiations perhaps does diminish. I think at the very end of the window, there was sort of noises that, okay, yeah, he might come back in, and that kind of just gave United a bit more credibility maybe with, you know, with the likes of a talks with Villa where they say, no, you do have to pay him, because we will ultimately take him back.
Yeah.
I just can't see how that relationship gets repaired. No. Amorim has been so strong publicly and privately about it. He literally dropped him as soon as he was unhappy with his performances in training at the derby, before the derby, and then he didn't get a look in after that. He was on the bench once, but it was basically because they had a load of injuries. So I just can't see how that gets repaired. And ultimately, even broader than that, I think, you know, Ratcliffe, INEOS, they've made their own call, and even to the wages point of view, as I say, they're trying to reduce the wage bill, and he is, you know, if not the top earner, then very close to it.
And then obviously, if he were to get sold, it would be a PSR 100% profit deal, which everyone's obviously looking for, and everyone's like celebrating when they get one. But obviously, in the background, there's then Kobbie Mainoo and Alejandro Garnacho, who Garnacho got closely linked in January to Napoli, reportedly.
They made a bid, Napoli, 40 million.
So is there now a case of, okay, if Rashford goes, that's 40 million, 100% pure profit, and then kind of looking at Garnacho and Kobbie Mainoo when they're looking to make even more profit, is there a sense of, is that a genuine possibility, or does Amorim really appreciate both them players and the club are a stern no?
I don't know. I don't get the vibe that it's a stern no just because of all that's happened and those kind of conversations that were happening in January. And just his selection. I mean, to be fair to him, he's played Garnacho a lot recently. Yeah. Maybe it's out of necessity with Ahmad being injured and you know, Højlund and Xerxes kind of flattering to Ziv a little bit. But he has shown certainly good application in his defensive game. I know he didn't make the tackle on Elanga, for example, but you could see that he was desperately
he's running back.
Elanga is rapid. And so, but does Amorim want more from a player in that position? You know, he's been positive about him recently, and I think that's genuine. But also, you kind of do want to talk up a player that potentially might be on the market in the summer. I thought Ratcliffe's point on it was really interesting. I can't remember which interview he did say it in, but he basically said no young player at United will be sold for financial reasons. Right. But it didn't, for my money, preclude the fact that they might sell a young player based on a football strategy if they think that actually this is the best thing for the team. From a United point of view, I'd be very sad if that meant, you know, Kobbie Mainoo leaving the club, given the kind of clear association that he's had since he was like 4. You know, that really cool picture of him with the United top on, and the goal in the FA Cup final, the performances in the FA Youth Cup to win that as well a couple of years prior. What a fantastic story, and that's part of United's heritage, and that's what makes clubs special, rather than, well, we traded really well, and there's obviously a certain romance to winning things, but also there's a romance to seeing the development of a player come all the way through. So, but ultimately, you know, I do think that they won't be selling them to turn a profit and make a PSR benefit. It just so happens that they are probably two of the players with the highest value in the squad. So if you really did need to buy it elsewhere, then they are options for you, and they will have suitors for sure.
Okay, so moving on into sort of the summer and what potentially we might see from Manchester United is, I want to talk to you just a little bit about, obviously, the priority in terms of the recruitment positions and where the club right now feels the most important. And obviously the striker is the absolute, you know, top of the line, which everyone's speaking about. But then I also know that we probably need about 4 or 5, especially for, as we've just covered, this system to function well.
Yeah. I think centre forward is the key position, and not necessarily because you don't want to see Rasmus Højlund develop and flourish. Joshua Zirkzee still, kind of young as well. So, they are options. It's just that they haven't got the goal scoring history that you'd need for United to then, spring forward into these the places that they're ultimately trying to achieve. And I think it's also, Højlund against City, I sort of fluctuate on Højlund, where I think how much of it is the team not doing what he needs, and I think there's certainly a degree of that, but I'm more leaning towards the fact that Højlund isn't doing what the team needs, and it was pretty anonymous against Man City again, where there isn't this kind of determination, it feels like, to score and make an impact. He's trying, but maybe, I don't know, not in quite the right ways, and the runs, there was a moment actually where Bruno Fernandes had it and was advancing with it, and it was a good sort of spring attack that they'd made, and Højlund kind of really goes for a run behind, but he goes to the left and into the kind of space where Dorgu was occupying. And ultimately, Fernandes goes to Dorgu and he hits a shot wide, and then there was a conversation between Fernandes and Højlund afterwards where Fernandes was clearly saying to him, make that run to the right, really, and open up the space. But I just think about the stats. Harrison, I've got some stats for you.
Here we go.
Right?
Here we go.
Let me just make sure I've got these correct, because I think these are just like crazy, really. So Højlund has had 21 shots in the Premier League this season. So that is like, way down. You're talking like the bottom quarter, really, for all Premier League players. So, for example, Lacroix at Crystal Palace has got 25. Right. Milenkovic at Forest has got 26. You'll notice that they are central defenders and not strikers.
Big glaring issue.
2.98 is his XG for the season. Zirkzee's 27 shots, so not even that much more, 4.65 XG. Garnacho's had 70 shots, so he is taking a lot. That's the 12th most in the Premier League, but he's obviously got 4 Premier League goals, which is, I think, like 70th in terms of... So there's obviously a balance that needs to be addressed there, where, fair enough, you've got a guy in Garnacho who's taking the chance, trying shots, but they're often from locations that aren't really the best optimal moments to try and score, versus somebody that isn't either taking the shots or isn't even getting the opportunity to take them in Højlund. So they obviously need a striker who is out there that would be affordable and that could, I don't know, come into this team and make a genuine impact immediately, but also sort of fit the profile that INEOS are trying to get into the club. We've got a few names we can discuss. I'm not going to leave it there. But
I know. But we all know the names, and I'm sure you'll get onto them. But it's like, I always look at the type of number 9. So obviously the names reported are Liam Delap, Gyökeres, Osimhen, Sesko. But who's leading the ranks for one in terms of the striker target that they want, and why is it that player?
Delap is someone that's a genuine link. Wilcox had him at Man City, signed him actually from Derby County as a young player. So that's something that they could explore, and that is also something that is financially could make sense, because I believe that Delap has got a relegation release clause, something like £40 million. So that feels a palatable amount for a 22-year-old who's now got 12 Premier League goals in the this season. So it's his first season in the top flight, and he's done well, because at Hull, I think he got like 8 in 31 on loan there last season in the league at least, and that's the Championship. So it's kind of unexpected that he'd have this kind of impact in a team like Ipswich, where they're not creating all those kind of chances. And to your point, he has that kind of number 9 feel to him, sort of aggression, and would bring more to the game than just putting the finishing touch in, which obviously I think is what United ultimately do want. So I think he's genuine, but then do they want to try and go for someone that's actually a bit more experienced and has that record? I'm told Victor Gyökeres is unlikely. Obviously Arsenal have been linked with him. I wonder if he's setting his sort of sights on a team that is definitely in the Champions League and can compete for titles, albeit obviously he's got that relationship with Amorim. Osimhen I find a really fascinating one, just because he's done it in Italy with Napoli repeatedly. He's doing it in Turkey. Galatasaray. He's got that sharpness of touch and that kind of ability to make things happen. The issue, obviously, wages big, and transfer fee for a 26-year-old. So again, I think Gyökeres is a bit old, a few months, but he's still 26, turning 27 in June. So I think they feel like players that are in their prime, ready to go right now. But I wonder if the strategy at United would be to go a little bit below that and have them kind of develop and have a longer period of time at United. but the Osimhen one possibly could make more sense if Napoli are open to a swap deal, and we've just been discussing Garnacho.
Yeah, no, it makes sense, and it's almost surprising how much the number 9's being prioritised this summer, because we've got so many other holes in the squad and there's no real names that are concrete. The Liam Delap stuff is very, very like out there as reported, but I think the only other link that I've seen to a Ruben Amorim like player in terms of the roles that we need in the squad was Giovanni Quenda, and he went to Chelsea. Yeah. And obviously you reported on that, I'm pretty sure, and you said something on the lines of it was felt like Manchester United a little bit of a missed opportunity, but they weren't too not bothered, but they weren't too reactive to that. Is there anyone else in terms of probably need a central midfield player, probably need a couple wing backs maybe, and maybe a number 10? It doesn't feel like there's any sort of concrete links to players in them positions at all, really.
No, and that's something that I need to go and do my job, right, and try and figure out. I think you're right. Like, athletic midfielder is something that I think he wants, which then colours the conversation around Kobbie Mainoo, for example. Yeah. Also Manuel Ugarte. I mean, he came off again before Casemiro, for example, against Man City, came off at half-time at Nottingham Forest. So that's an intriguing kind of dynamic there. Someone that has played under Amorim before, so you'd think he'd be absolutely bona fide in this system. I'd agree with you. Wing backs again, because I mean Kenda was somebody that I think Amorim would have wanted him. Yeah. Ultimately, United felt it was too rich for that age profile of him, and also the fact that he's been loaned back to Sporting. The United just could not spend 50 million euro on a player and then loan him out. They needed to be performing for them immediately. But that clearly shows you the way of thinking. Dorgu being one, Leon being another. Harry Amas has been sort of in the first team picture
come up a little bit
more
now,
recently. Yeah. So maybe they're thinking, okay, if he can take that step, then maybe we don't have to go into the market. But he loves a left-footed wing back.
Yeah, clearly.
Bikonki was on the bench against City as well. So you've got, he wants that balance in his team. So I'll maybe put a premium on somebody like that coming in. Yeah. But the centre backs seem fairly sort of well stocked, don't they? With Maguire now extending and De Ligt, showing himself, and Yoro had a good game against City. Yeah.
Martinez to come back,
Martinez to come back. So I think centre forward clearly, or at least a proven forward maybe, and then athletic midfielder and possibly a wing back. Yeah,
and obviously there's been a little bit of links to Andre Onana to Saudi Arabia, and I'm obviously not sure how much you could say on that, but is there a sense that could also be a position that Ruben Amorim's maybe looking at it too?
It could be. I mean, I don't think, from my knowledge, there's a sort of genuine substance in the Saudi Arabian links. I mean, I'm sure there's been conversations around it, but from my knowledge, I don't think United would be looking at a new goalkeeper this summer. No. That being said, obviously, you kind of feel like it's not quite working at the moment with Onana, where, okay, fine, he's made mistakes and people can certainly criticise him for that. He's also made a lot of good saves. Yeah. But that element of him passing out from the back and kind of making the right selections in the long passes, it's not quite there. He sort of was on the ball quite a lot against City, for example, and you sort of want more, more energy from it. Yeah. Is that because he's behind a different centre-back, pairing?
Or pretty much every time.
Pretty much every time. And Martinez being the really good one that you could build out from the back. I think that's probably some element to it, but clearly there needs to be work on the training ground to make that a more fluid situation. Yeah,
it does feel like as well, a lot of people are saying that Amorim's trying to build something with Erik ten Hag's players and stuff like that. Is there a sense that another idea, what you just mentioned there, is the Quenda one was a bit more like, we don't want to go for a sporting player because it's an Amorim player, and we want to try and prove ourselves in other different areas. Was that something they're scared of maybe doing again?
Yeah, I don't think they'd be against it per se if it was the right signing, because I think they were definitely looking at kind of a genuine sort of signing, but I think there's a appreciation of, they went to Ajax quite a lot for Erik ten Hag. You need to be
more astute than
that. You need to be sort of looking outside. There's obviously thousands of players in the world. Okay, only a few can play for Man United, but they're certainly wider than just one club. Yeah,
and if you were to put a priority list on the positions, like maybe 4, how would you rank them?
Well, personally, or what I think the club
I mean, you can probably do the club as well if you wanted to.
I just think number 1 is striker, isn't it? Centre forward. They just have to get goals in this team. Yeah. Would I even say a kind of a number 10, because you've got Ahmad to come back, and Bruno has felt pretty good as a number 6. Certainly a midfielder. It's okay. Yeah, striker, midfielder, wing back. I mean, it's literally it's the span of the team, really, isn't it?
It's really frustrating because you keep mentioning athletic midfielder when you say midfielder, and obviously that's something that's like a massive red flag for United, and it does feel like we spent the money on Ugarte, and he was brought in, and I think they reported as his tackle and interceptions numbers when we signed him, and they put out another graphic that was his distance covered.
Right, yeah, I saw that recently. See that?
Yeah,
and 16k.
And it was just a bit like, all right, okay, but like we're probably still going to go and get another midfielder, either to play alongside him or to displace him.
Because I would say Ugarte, he certainly had good moments. I think he was brilliant away at Anfield, for example. Progressing the ball, it feels like an issue, and also getting about the pitch. And I don't know if that's sometimes a hangover from being on international duty, but obviously his previous career was in Portugal and then in Ligue 1. Ligue 1 usually is a kind of a good physical, but he wasn't playing all the time for PSG. So does he need? Can he get that into his body? Yeah. Is that an issue? Maybe I'm sort of missing.
No, I picked up on the same thing because I thought when I watched him before he joined Manchester United, he was labelled as this incredibly athletic ball winner. Yeah. And I was looking at sort of the efficiency of the ball winning, some of his running, and I was like, he's patched as this he's pitched, as this like working hard, almost dog-like midfielder, and it does feel like that when we defend a little bit deeper and the games are a bit more itchy and scratchy like the Anfield game. But in terms of the general performance of him and the general physical output from him, there's clearly something that I don't know. Maybe I think they've signed him before Ruben Amorim come in, and obviously he's a player, but I don't know if Amorim's absolutely like ecstatic that he's there. I just don't think he's using him like a player who, for example, he had Bruno Fernandes, and it feels like he's leveraging a lot more on that type of player than he is on Ugarte, especially considering that they're a bit more closer because of the language and stuff like that. But it just feels to me like, do you remember like the Van der Beek stuff? It feels awfully similar to that. It feels like they've brought someone in, and it's like...
Yeah, it's a very good equivalent, actually.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, Ten Hag tried him, but he wasn't... Even though they played... Well, they worked together, it wasn't like, here I am to save
it wasn't
the
like
day.
Finally.
I think it would be really fascinating what happens when Mainoo's back fit, who starts more regularly out of Casemiro, Ugarte, Mainoo, and obviously Eriksen, but he's leaving at the end of the season. Yeah.
I think is there questions around Mainoo physically at the club, in the system? Because it was just before we wrap up, because when we mentioned it before, I completely forgot to ask you. But obviously, he tried him at false 9 one game. He's tried him in one of the 2 10s, and then he's also obviously tried him in the 2-man midfield. Is there a case of is the club or the manager concerned about physical positioning? Is there a little bit of...
I think concern will probably be too strong. I think there's certainly an appreciation that getting him to sort of sprint up and down the pitch is just not a good use of his talents. His ability is close control of the ball in tight situations, making things happen, but also progressing the ball when he's not having to, carry it himself necessarily too far. He can obviously do that. He did it really well against Liverpool, I remember. But it feels like you've seen him kind of chasing back possession, and it doesn't look right. He's not that kind of player, and so to ask him to do that is just wrong. But I think he can certainly operate in this system as long as the specifications are, tailored. I mean, like for example, Casemiro, I think has had a good run recently, and I think it's probably because you've got the 2 6s there with this 3 centre backs. You've got quite a lot, and then even the wing backs. You've got a lot of people around him where there's not this sort of big hole, and he's able to make those interventions, the tackles. He's not the most progressive ball carrier, but he can play a pass certainly. Yeah. And so he's able to, make his impression on the game in that way. And I think that's the kind of thing Mainoo could do, certainly in that deeper role. But also, obviously we saw him away in Bucharest, wasn't it? I think where he had a really good game as a number 10. Yeah. And I think he can certainly make a pivotal contribution at the top end of the pitch.
Last question: Ruben Amorim at Manchester United. How's it gone down in terms of internal?
I think it fluctuates, doesn't it? When you're having sort of bad moments, then you're going to have people that are questioning, is this the right person to lead us? That being said, you've obviously got, a sort of, I think, a deep affection for him from several players as well. He had that explosive moment, didn't he, after the Brighton game in the dressing room where he really laid his heart out, I think. That was an emotional sort of outburst. And so how that then translates to getting people to do what you want them to do is going to be an interesting thing to observe. I think he's got his coaching with him as well. So Carlos Fernandes, he's only 30, and Adelio Candido, I think 28, plus a few other staff members as well. So he is, I think, quite tight with them. But clearly, I think his ability to communicate is an important aspect of his approach. The fact that he was a player so recently, should bring him closer to the players than if he was, I guess, retired 20 years ago. But it's to be seen, really, and I think he would even accept that himself. He calls it on, repeatedly in press conferences in terms of him not having the time if he doesn't get things right. So I think he's under no illusions about the reality of the situation.
It feels weird because he's really when you do the open training sessions, he's really warm to the players and the groups, and when they're doing the rondos, he gets involved. And I remember his first coaching session was a lot of laughing and joking, even with Rashford, for example. And then in the press conferences, he's like a cold-shouldered, like really hard manager.
I think he can be cold with them as well. And I think, but there was a moment in open training where he was off doing keepy uppies whilst they were doing rondos. Apparently he did that in Portugal as well, so it's not anything new there. But and you have to have that. You can't just be this kind of, happy manager who kind of puts his arm around players all the time. You have to have discipline. You have to show that you're the boss. Clearly that's going to upset people along the way, but if you then get the results, then people will buy into it more. It's just the fact that at the moment they haven't really had that stretch of results. They've had isolated games where it's felt like it's working, and you can see what's being drilled on the coaching pitches. I wonder if they end up winning the Europa League, I'm getting excited, but if they end up doing that, that gives him that sort of
the leverage
level, I think, of credibility that then he can go and springboard from.
Yeah, because I think everyone was always like, remember when we went to Anfield and Etihad, and I think Martinez and Bruno were both like, this is how we can play. It's just like the mentality. And it's
proactive. That's the issue with the system. If they're too sort of, if they're defensively minded, then it's sit back and counter. What he wants really is central defenders to be aggressive, getting involved in attacking plays, and then it actually becomes a pretty aggressive system because you're probably having 5 attackers rather than 4. So it's that getting the right profile of players is essential. Yeah, no, because it feels like the players are just they're not the level of, but they are working hard. But it feels like the level of player just isn't there, and it's almost it's really difficult to be like, come on, like do a bit more. But it's like the level of the actual players is not there, and I feel that's what Amorim's doing as well. I feel like he's really underwhelmed by the quality, and as fans, I'm not looking at the game as if, I'm not expecting this level of this group to do so much more. And obviously, I'm expecting them to do better than 14th and do stuff like that. But when we go away to your Forests and Ipswich, even I remember at the start of him, it does feel like there has been a level in this squad where he's almost like, I can only ask him to do so much. And Joe, he had a moment in the press conference yesterday where he was like, if we're fighting for something in the league, he was like, maybe the centre halves actually do go in with the press. And maybe they do. And I feel like he's almost dying to get to the summer so we can reset the season, because I feel like he's really, really like angry that there's barely anything to play for. And it does feel like there's that extra spark on Europa League nights now for us, which sounds really bad, but but it does feel but it does feel like they just mean that little bit more. And hopefully the season will be okay. I know, it'd be a disaster, wouldn't it, if they went out to Lyon.
It'd be the rest of the season would just be incredibly difficult. But let's go to Bilbao and win it. But thank you very much for watching. If you did enjoy, please don't forget to like, comment and follow the channel, and we'll be back next week for some more podcasts. Thank you.